And welcome back to Fuzzy Dirty Gaming and a follow-up video to my early monk build that I've been playing a lot of in early access. I've now cleared all the map tier missions from Doriani and got the character into a position where if I wanted to, I can now pump some money into the build to get it pushing towards the pinnacle endgame content. However, this is probably not something I'm going to do yet, which I'll come to later in the video. This video is more of just a showcase and explanation on how the build works, the passive tree, and the ascendancies I went for and the gear on the character. Now this character has been a ton of fun once I figured it out. Once you get your third ascendancy and get some chaos resistance into the build, it feels really tanky. The only thing that really kills the character are on-death effects, which feel super overtuned, overused, and very cheap and annoying in Path of Exile 2. I'm going to cover more about my thoughts on endgame in a separate video, but in its current state, I'm not a massive fan at all. I actually much prefer the campaign to the endgame in the state that it's currently in. So in regards to the build, I've linked a really basic max roll planner to the video so that you can see the skill tree and the gems. I'm not a contributor on max roll, so I'm not able to publish the notes section. So I'll try and explain how the build comes together in this video. So maybe use the written guide just to put your tree together and gems if you wanted to give it a go. But refer back to the video if there's any parts that you're unsure of. So we'll load up the character. It's currently level 87 and it's an Invoker Monk. So we'll just go through, run through the passive tree, the skill links, and then the items that I've got. We'll go through the gear first because I've tried to make it as easy as possible and I didn't want to spend a ton of currency on the build because I know I'm going to want to try every class at some point, which is what we're going to get onto next. So if we look at my gear, it's fairly straightforward. Some of it is decent that I've crafted myself and got lucky. Other bits I've bought, but nothing is mega expensive. So in terms of the staff, the three stats you really want are base crit chance, attack speed, and as much fizz damage as you can get. However, the more fizz damage you have, the more expensive an item is. I would think a staff like this is probably 15 exalts, I would think. The reason we're going fizz is because we use lightning and cold damage, and the cold damage scales mostly from physical, and we don't want to go pushing cold because it doesn't really have any effect on our lightning. So we want to scale either elemental damage or physical damage. So the staff I looked for, I bought this a while ago, I think it might have been the one I had in the previous video as well, is just mediocre fizz damage, good crit chance, and semi-decent attack speed. The crit damage bonus is just nice to have. Accuracy doesn't really matter, you're never going to struggle to cap accuracy on a melee build. And then because we're trying to go physical, then they are the runes that we put in as well to get 40% extra. So it's 2 iron runes in the quarterstaff. Gothic quarterstaff is the base, you want to use it as the highest base crit and decent base damage. For the helmet and really all the gear, we're looking for as much energy shield and evasion as we can get where we go hybrid, life and resistances. It's actually quite tricky to cap your resistances in Path of Exile 2, but it's a super important part of endgame. When I got to maps, I was really badly geared. I was under resists for everything. I was minus for all of my resistances and I got obliterated in T1 maps. I maybe completed 2 out of 8. That was more due to really bad luck in the campaign. I think I died over 200 times in the campaign. Now I've shored my resistances up, got a build going, I very rarely die. So the helmet I've gone for is energy shield evasion hybrid, life and resistances. And then to try and help with some chaos resistance, I've put a soul core of Takati in there just for 7% extra chaos resistance. The armor is quite important to get big energy shield and evasion or massive evasion, one of the two. It's quite an important piece because for our ascendancy it gives us more spirit, and obviously energy shield will add to our energy shield, so it's kind of a double layer of defense. So again, life, resistances, that's it, and then as much energy shield and evasion as you can get. For the amulet, again, just life and resistances is all you care about. In terms of the anoint on the amulet, I've kind of put immaterial on there. I don't think it's particularly good. So it's just increased evasion if recharge has started recently, which doesn't actually occur that often. And then just 30% increased evasion. I basically just used what I had. There's obviously much better anoints you can put on there for damage. If you were going for like a damage anoint, I'd probably do something like 20% increased freeze build-up and then 50% increased damage against frozen enemies. There's lots of other good ones as well. This blinding strike is pretty decent. If you have a look around, I'm sure there's tons of notables better than the one I've anointed. But I basically didn't want to buy anything from trade, so I just used the deli resources that I had to put an anoint that actually gave something to the build. The rings, again, you're just looking for life resistances. If you can get some damage, then great. And then same with the other one. My rings aren't anything special. They are literally just as much life as I could get resistances. This ring I've had for absolutely ages. It's not particularly good, but rings are quite expensive to buy, so I've kind of just been eyeing and trying to craft ones myself. The gloves, again, I've had for absolutely ages. They're not very good. These can either be pure evasion or evasion energy shield, and again, it's just life and resistances. The boots, getting as much movement speed as you can is important because maps are really big. It feels quite bad if you don't have a lot. It's also a good defensive layer to dodge out the way of things without having to use dodge roll. And again, it's just life, resistances, and movement speed. And the belt, you've guessed it, again, life and resistances. So at the moment, this is really just like a shell of a build. I wanted a build that I could make that I can just use the items that I either purchase, craft, or find. And I don't have to worry too much about specific interactions or getting a unique in the build, which means I then need to rejig my resistances. I will reiterate, it's really, really important to get resistance capped. It's a massive layer of defenses. In PoE 1, it's kind of a given. Gear's really cheap. You can roll resistances really easy with things like essences. It's much more difficult in Path of Exile 2. So do what you can to get resistance cap as early as you can. But you do lose resistances as you go through. I think you lose another 10% at yellow maps and another 10% at red. So keep an eye on your resistances if you're kind of leveling up through the map tiers. And then all I've done for runes is if I didn't need resistances, I've gone for increased armor, evasion, and energy shield in gear. If I needed resistances, I've obviously socketed the rune in for those resistances. I haven't really looked at soul cores just because I was getting fed up trying to get resistance capped. So I just stuck some runes in to enable myself to do that. In terms of flasks, you just want the best life flask you can get that recovers life really quickly. Same with mana. Mana flasks, you don't have to use that often with the way I've got the build set up, but every now and again you will need to use it, but your mana flask, anyone should do. And as I say, life, just the most recovery you can get, works really well. Charms, because you can only have one, it really doesn't matter what one you use. Whatever annoys you the most, use that charm. I don't like getting frozen, so I've used grant immunity to freeze. The other one I use quite a lot is immunity to poison, because poison seems to be everywhere. But now I've got my chaos resistance up a little bit, it doesn't feel quite as bad. So if we go into the character sheet, I've got 60% chance to evade, 53% armor, and then we're sitting on life of just over 2,100, and then a decent chunk of energy shield. Because of the ascendancy, we're able to get 195 spirit, so we can fit quite a lot of decent auras in. As you can see, I'm res capped, not on chaos, way over on fire, but I don't want to rejig my gear because it will probably mean replacing lots of pieces that might be quite expensive. So if we go into the skills, by no means take these as these are the best. This is just what I've found I like to use. I've seen loads of people with more DPS on this type of build, but I kind of went the defensive route and the basic gearing route. I've seen lots of builds that do more damage. This is by no means the best Ice Monk build in the world, but I wanted to make it simple if people wanted to follow along, and I don't have to worry about buying expensive gear or getting specific pieces that when you bring a build guide out, those pieces can skyrocket in price. So I'll go through the skill links and then I'll explain with some kind of footage in the background how the build comes together. But essentially when you're clearing, using Shattering Palm, which will basically mark an enemy. When you shatter that enemy or kill that enemy, the enemy shatters, does an explosion. We combo that with Herald of Ice, which also explodes. It gives you nice, decent coverage. It's nothing amazing, it's not screen wide, but it's plenty good enough that if you do start to get overwhelmed, you know you can blow an entire pack up. So Shattering Palm, I'm still not settled on my links, but I've gone for create chill ground when you freeze an enemy, 50% more freeze build up, and then just more area damage, less area of effect. This is kind of just because I had this gem lying around. You only ever really target one enemy with that, so you don't need any area at all because you're going to strike that one enemy. Doing more damage means I've got more chance of freezing that enemy, spreading the chill, and then blowing everyone up. Realistically, you could probably have nothing in these and it would perform almost as well. And then linked to Herald of Ice, we've got Cold Infusion because it only deals cold damage, so getting extra cold damage on the explosions is nice. We've got Elemental Focus for more LE damage and can't inflict ailments. I'm pretty sure it can't inflict ailments anyway, so again, that's just a bit more damage. And then here, this is quite a nice one. So it's recover 4% of energy shield when a supported skill deals a killing blow to a shocked enemy. We do get shocks through our charged staff. This doesn't proc every now and again, but I didn't have anything else to fit in, and this seemed like a nice gem to put in. The other auras which we'll go through, got Herald of Thunder just for a bit more lightning damage, and there we've just got Clarity linked to it, so we can get a bit more mana regen. And then Cannibalism, this works really well as well when you're mapping 4% life recovered on kill when a skill is active. So it doesn't have to be your Herald strikes that kill it. Any monster you kill, you're going to get 4% life back. This can be amazing. When you're in a pack, you get a bit low, you kill 9 or 10 enemies, that's 40% of your life back automatically. Ghost Dance works really well with big energy shield. Essentially, just over every 3 seconds, if you get hit, you consume a Ghost Shroud to recover energy shield equal to 5% of your evasion. And then Combat Frenzy is how we generate power charges. And this is essentially grants you a frenzy charge when you freeze, electrocute, or pin an enemy. We only freeze enemies, but we do it all the time. So every 5.4 seconds, we're going to be getting a power charge, which we can use for charged staff. I've linked that to Profusion, which means every 1 in 2 on average, you're going to get an additional power charge. And then we've got Vitality just for a little bit of life regen because we had the Spirit, so why not? And then the other 3 skills to cover are damaging skills. So the first one is Charge Staff, which essentially gives you a lightning damage buff per power charge that you consume. The duration, once I get it qualitied up on the 5 power charges I've got, is about 50 to 55 seconds. That's really important because these maps are a pain. You may end up having to traverse back the whole map. With doing that, you can ensure that your Charge Staff has always got charges to it because it won't take you 50 seconds to run to your next enemy. We link that to Conduction, which gives it more chance of shock. It only does lightning damage. This is our only source of shock, so we want to make sure we're doing that as much as possible. Persistence, which is 40% more skill effect duration, again, just because the maps are so big. Lightning Infusion, just get more lightning damage from Charged Staff. And then we've got Maim. I like this because essentially every enemy that gets hit will get maimed. That makes them slower. It just makes things much, much safer. So that is almost like a passive DPS. You can shoot your projectiles at enemies in the distance and kill them over time, but that's really there just to buff all of the damage up when we're getting close to enemies, apply those shocks, and just get lots of damage going. And then your main clearing skill is going to be Ice Strike. And the setup I've gone for, there's tons of gems you can use, and there's probably better ones. So I've gone for Ice Strike. I've gone for Primal Armament, which is 25% more weapon elemental damage. Gone for Ice Bite. So as soon as I freeze an enemy with this skill, I get 35% damage as cold damage for 3 seconds. So this is pretty much always up. Got Martial Tempo, which is really important. Attack speed, without it, it feels a little bit bad. I do think this is kind of a must-have gem in your Ice Strike. And then I've gone for Heft. This is better the more physical damage you have on your staff. So this is not the best option for me because I don't have a ton, but it was still the better gem out of all the other ones that I could have put in. And it gives you 30% more maximum physical damage. So if you've got a staff with lots of fizz, it makes sure that basically your maximum range gets pushed up by 30%. So you're doing much more damage. We're converting nearly all of that to cold. And then that ends up being a nice little boost. There is probably a better gem for this, but I did have Close Combat in there, I think, originally. But the mana cost, I think, is a little bit more than 120. Yeah, it's 140. And I just noticed I was running out of mana. So that's the reason I've popped in Heft. If you've got no issues with mana, I'd put in Close Combat because it's just it's 25% more attack damage all the time. It doesn't worry about what physical damage you've got on your Ice Strike. And then Tempest Bell, I very rarely use apart from on bosses because I don't really need it for anything else. And I've linked that to Magnified Effect to get more area of effect in case the boss moves a little bit. We've got Heavy Swing, which is just 35% more fizz damage. Attack speed doesn't matter because it triggers off of the attacks that we do on the bell. Close Combat, again, just for more attack damage. And then I've got Excise, which is 40% more chance to critically hit. And supported skills have an 8-second cooldown. You should very rarely, although I haven't tackled the end game pinnacle bosses, need to use 2 bells. So 40% more chance to critically hit is just awesome. So they're the gem links. There is a spare socket. I don't think there's anything worth putting in, but I may come back to this build later and tinker with it. So the way, as I say, the build works is you Shattering Palm into a pack. It marks that enemy. You kill that enemy. Then you get your Shattering Palm explosion and your Herald of Ice explosion. Because you're freezing, you can get power charges. You then activate Charged Staff, add that charge to it. And then you basically rinse and repeat. The bell, you might want to put down for rares just because the quicker you kill them, the better. Because all there is in this game is proximity shields, lightning explosions, on-death explosions. Rare monsters themselves are very, very easy. The modifiers that come with them can just basically kill you through no fault of your own. Especially on a melee build, it gets super, super annoying when you do everything perfectly and then you can't see because of the screen clutter that there is a explosion sitting underneath you and it goes off and you die. It's happened, yeah, numerous times, and it's pretty much the only way I've died on the character. So we'll go through the skill tree. So the first thing to note that you have to take once you get your auras into play is resonance, because it will turn those frenzy charges that we generate into power charges. That's super, super important. If you forget to do that, you're just not going to generate power charges. You're going to have permanent frenzy charges that you can't do anything with. Now, I think there's loads of different ways you can go on Monk for the skill tree. I've tried to balance it between defenses and damage, but I've seen a lot of people just take all damage nodes. I won't go through the whole skill tree because it's going to be on the max roll planner anyway. But it's basically getting energy shield, evasion, damage, and power charges. So there's a few nodes that are important to look at in terms of the way you play the character or the way you build the character. So the first one is this, which is +1 energy shield per 12 evasion on your body armor, which does give you the option if you can't find or don't want to run an evasion energy shield armor, you can just get a massive evasion armor and then that will give you energy shield. It won't give you as much as a combined energy shield, but because of the ascendancy, the more evasion you get, the more armor you get as well, or the more physical damage reduction. And then this note here as well also would go well with just a pure evasion body armor. So if I could, I would probably have a massive evasion body armor, but I got really lucky rolling my chest and I'm kind of happy with it as it is. And there's just some really other nice nodes, like this one this basically gives us 100% increased damage with our Herald. So we've got 50% cold damage to us when we're affected by Herald of Ice and 50% lightning damage. These crit nodes are really good. You get like 1% base crit here, 35% crit damage here, and 25 chance here. These are really nice. 30% increased defenses while wielding a staff. It should say quarter staves, and it does work like quarter staves. I think this is just a typo from GGG. And then we've got here, when you consume power charges, it counts as consuming an additional charge. That means when you kill that first pack of mobs and get your first power charge, it will give you 2. If you get lucky and you get your 2 power charges, it will give you 3. So it's just a really good way to get your damage boosted up as soon as you kill that first pack of mobs in the map. And then we've got in here for +2 power charges and then basically more crit damage if we've consumed recently, which is most of the time. I won't go through the rest of the tree because it is just elemental damage, crit, and evasion energy shield. There's 2 nodes that I am not sure they're worth taking, and that's these faster recharge here. The reason I say that is we get our kind of instant recharge through Ghost Dance, and you very rarely go through a map where there's not degens on the ground, and then your energy shield is never going to start recharging when you've got a degen. So I'm not 100% sure these are great, but I've kept them in for now. And then the next node I'm pathing to is just mana cost of skills, because I just don't like having to use a mana flask every like 20 seconds. So we've got this node here, which is 10% reduced cost of skills. And then we add these up to 18 and then 26. So it's a decent chunk. Ascendancy is lead me through grace, protect me from harm, and then sunder my enemies. I've not been able to do my last one yet. I did the Trial of Sekimas, got to the 4th floor, and then for some reason, as soon as you hit the 4th floor, everything takes about 10% of the damage that they took earlier on. I don't have a ton of DPS. I kind of rely on a mix of survivability and DPS, and that just doesn't work in Trials, especially not on the last floor. You'll just get chunks of honor lost all the time. And the end boss also looks horrendous. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it. So for the sake that I would probably take something like either Elemental Expression and figure something out there, or just these 10% damage, I'm really not that bothered about it. I may tackle the Trial Master at some point, but I think I need more DPS to be able to do that. One important thing to note on the tree, which I totally forgot about, was jewels, because we path through quite a lot of jewel sockets. Really, the only important thing to get on here is +1 rage on melee hit. If you can get other stuff like melee damage, speed, crit chance, whatever you need, maybe resistances, attributes, if you can spend more, do so. But really, I just went for jewels that weren't mega expensive, and they gave me rage on melee hit. So I've got one here, got one here, then we have one down there. So I've basically got 3 jewels in the tree that give me 3 rage on melee hit. So on a boss, after a few seconds, you're going to be at your max rage. It's just a way to avoid using a rage gem. So everywhere you can on your jewel sockets, get +1 rage on melee hit. And that's kind of it for the build. It's really, really simple. If you're leveling a monk, I don't have a leveling guide because I leveled horrendously. Like I said, I had hundreds of deaths in the campaign trying to figure stuff out. I don't like monk that much if you don't have it as like a second or third character when you're starting it, because I don't find the skills are any good until you get towards the end of Act 1. I've done a playthrough to the end of Act 1 on every character, and monk was my longest by far because I just don't feel they have very good skills at their disposal early on. But if you're doing it as a second character, you can obviously craft really, really regularly. You can get uniques, you can buy leveling stuff off trade that's got big stats, and then I'm sure it would be nice and easy. And then as soon as you can go into Frost, you can do. I do feel that lightning skills are better in the first few acts. Then once you've got like a decent weapon and you've got your points spread more on the tree, then you can go to like the cold version. So I may figure out a leveling guide, but at the moment I haven't. But I think if you've got leveling gear, you wouldn't really have a problem following this tree and just adding the skills as they come online. That's kind of it for the video. It's really just an update because people have been asking what I've been up to, because I haven't done a video for a while because I've not been that well. I'm better now, so I thought it's time to bring out a video for people. Like I say, there's going to be better guides around, but I try and keep mine nice and simple so that all you need is life and resistance gear and a mediocre weapon, and you'll be able to get all the way through all of your map tiers with fairly little effort. I'm going to go on to something like a Deadeye next, but I will come back to this character just to try and do a simulacrum, do a breach boss, things like that. But I've been trying to farm the splinters and they just drop so rarely. I mean, even just showing the price of a simulacrum shows you how sparse the drops are. So if we go to I want delirium and I want a simulacrum, and then I have exalted orbs, they are 149 exalts for one simulacrum. Most of the time you don't drop splinters until you get to high tier maps, and then you might drop 3 to 5 in like a normal map without juicing. I don't think I've seen a breach splinter. I'm assuming they drop, but I haven't done a ton of breach. So it's something I might do if I farm it up myself, but I'm not going to pay 150 exalts to go and try and simulacrum. I'd rather farm it up myself and then just go and run it. So before I sign off, I'll just go through some general things in terms of mapping that you want to be aware of. Like I said, first thing is resistances are king. You will not survive very well without capped resistances and some chaos resistance. There are lots of explosions, off screens, all that sort of thing. And if you don't have your defenses in order, it's going to feel horrendous. Secondly, pay attention to on-death effects on rares. The way I tackle rares now, which sucks, which is one of the things I don't like about endgame, is you kind of have to really be careful. If you can't blitz that rare down in 1 second, you have to kind of hit him a few times or read the mods, move away, see what's happening, make sure there's no lightning explosion mod or anything like that. Kill him, and then you have to run away, wait to see if there's on-death explosions, then go back and loot. Gets really frustrating. Especially for me playing on controller, you can't really loot when there's enemies in the vicinity, so there ends up being a lot of backtracking. Now that's partly a player thing because controller doesn't really work that well for looting and fighting, but overall, just be careful of rare monsters. They will cause the majority of your deaths. Avoid burning ground as a mod on maps if you can. With Path of Exile 2, nearly all of the maps are linear, enclosed corridors. You can't avoid the burning ground, and it absolutely shreds through your life, even with max resistances. So if you have to run it, it's doable, but it feels really bad. And then the last thing I would say is rely on the tankiness of the build. You don't need to be dodge rolling away from every enemy. Nearly every single enemy, unless you've got horrendous mods on the map and the rare monster has some horrible mods, you're going to tank everything that the monster throws at you. And then if you do go down to half-life, you pop a life flask and finish the monsters off. You don't really have a need to dodge out of really anything other than explosions and degens. That's kind of it for the video. I hope it helps some people out. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.